um, people from varied faculty courses have come here. So someone has come from engineering, someone has come from commerce, different arts as well. So the idea of behind starting this lecture series perspective was to invite prominent development practitioners and know their perspective on different issues that our society, our economy is facing, and know their perspective and to increase our knowledge about this perspective. That is why, along with Asim sir's support, the students could start this perspective exhibition. And now, without consuming further time of the lecture, I would ask the chair of the session, Dr. Pankaj Seksharia, to introduce the speaker. Please welcome.
Thank you, Dhawan. All of you, I'm hoping you've seen the circular that went out introducing Professor Balasubramaniam, but I mean, it's my great pleasure and duty as well to kind of introduce formally. So, Professor Balasubramaniam at the moment is Director Research at the LV Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad, which is one of the country's and perhaps the world's leading eye research and eye treatment hospital. He has, as would be expected, visiting faculty positions and a number of other experiences in other parts of the world in a number of universities. I perhaps we don't know the details of all of them. He has a background in chemistry, so he's actually a scientist. He was awarded a PhD in chemistry from Columbia University in the USA in 1965. And I was just telling him as we were chatting was that perhaps none of us in this room was even born when he did his, I don't know, Asim, 65. He finished his PhD in 65. So there you are. Another very nice coincidence is I was asking him about if he knows the campus, and that's also a statement on his experience and what he knew Dr. Rodam Mistry personally. So the lady after whom this campus's name was somebody Professor Balasubramaniam knew very well. What it is like to add over here, I think in my personal experience of understanding and knowing him is that in him there's a very interesting combination of a scientist, a science administrator and a science communicator. So he writes a regular column for the Hindu every alternate Thursday, which I'm sure many of you, it's called Speaking of Science, your column Speaking of Science, which is a very, very interesting series that introduces science to the common public. It's worth reading both for the way it is written but also for the subject matter that is there. He's also the winner of the UNESCO Kalinga Award for Science Communication. So without much ado, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we're really looking forward to what should be a really fascinating and challenging and hopefully a provocative lecture. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So whatever you're comfortable with.
When Pankaj asked me to come and give a talk here, largely about what we view science and technology as these days. And that's important. I gave the title, Why is Science So Reactionary? Already. Yes. The word reactionary here is used essentially as the negative sense. In a sense that actually this is one of those things we would rather not have, because it does more negatives than positives. It can also be thought of in another way. It's reactionary in the sense existing paradigms of thought are somehow challenged. And they are challenged in a manner that you will actually have a brand new set of ideas that you had to work with. So you can see the conflict. On the one hand, you have a tradition that tells you lots of things. On the other, you have no, that's not the best thing to do. We actually have alternate points of view, and I think ours is provable, yours is just a myth. So you can see that there is a tremendous clash that occurs between traditional thought and scientific thought. Nothing new. It's not something that happened today, not when none of you were born. When I got my PhD in 1965. One nice thing about this, keep on People keep on reminding you that you're old. Even when I was a youngster, there was all this question that I raised. Just look at India. For many of us, India really is India post-1947. There was a completely different set of attitudes, ideas, models and so on that we began using for the entire country. Some of them were truly revolutionary. I'm not sure they could be done today. One man, one vote. Is it even possible to think of something like this today? Just think about that. Would it have been possible had Gandhiji not been there, or Nehru not been there, or Ambedkar, Patel, any of these people who are the forerunners of modern thought? You could never have had that. So already there is something very revolutionary in that. We don't realize this. But this business of one man, one vote is what gave you 67-3 in Delhi just yesterday. You couldn't have had it otherwise. There was even this question, remember, even today it was raised. Should there not be a minimum education qualification to vote or to hold office? Many of our own parliamentarians, MLAs and MPs and so on do not have proper education. That doesn't mean they do not have proper wisdom. So there is this argument that will keep on going. One that will hold on to what has been for years and years the practice, and the other that suddenly questions this, may not even question it. It may be one where, well, how about trying this? The other thing, 1947, I'm pointing this out because it's very important. Post-war, remember there were 2 world wars? Second World War ended in 1945, 46 around that time. It was really a fantastic moment because at the last count, as many as about 90 countries suddenly became independent of colonial rule. 90. Some countries were actually born, they didn't exist. And countries were made just using paper and pencil. Jordan, Iraq. Jordan didn't exist. And yet, because there was a political thing that we had to make West Asia in a particular manner, must make Israel, that kind of a thing, new countries were actually born. In any event, what 90 such countries became independent. Just one country decided that they will make friends with science. No prize for who that country is. Right? And there was also a rather interesting point that Pandit Nehru made at that time. He said development requires that we use the fruits of science, essentially technology. I also want to make that distinction here. Science as opposed to technology, or science that breeds and creates new technology, or science that explains existing technology. And what Nehru said was, we will make friends with science. What he meant at that time was not only we will create scientific institutions of whatever value they are going to be, but also we will use the fruits of science. And remember when he opened the Makaramangal Dam, he even said these are the modern temples of India.
Temples of modern India.
Temples. Interesting idea, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, it's already a challenging word because a temple has something completely different in terms of what it carries as a meaning. That was a challenge already because what it really meant was, maybe in his mind, what he meant at that time really was, I shall no longer use the existing methods. I may honor them, I may not honor them, but I am going to try a brand new method, a brand new process of thought and so on. That happened. It happened in a manner that we said the most important thing. It's the same thing. Aam Aadmi said exactly the same thing. Pani chahiye, bijli chahiye. Okay, I need power, I need peene ka pani, I need stuff to eat and so on. This was essentially the same idea that Nehru had. And we had Makranangal Dam. We already planted the seeds of the Green Revolution. Remember again, I was born at that time. I was born in 1939. So I actually went through, without realizing, went through the process of India becoming independent. And suddenly there was such hope, there was such a positive atmosphere around the country that we didn't even realize at the same time one of the ideas of India was to use vaccination. The smallpox vaccine, it was a global effort. There were no cars, there was no phones, there was not even electricity, an occasional bus and so on. And yet, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from all the way from Gujarat, Porbandar, all the way down to the Burmese border, people actually walked or took a train or whatever and inoculated close to 300 million people. All this was done in about 10 years. What I am talking about here is therefore technologies of this kind actually were used. There was objection. There's objection even today. There are countries that do not accept vaccination. America, okay, the real epitome of whatever you would have as science and technology and so on. There are states in America that actually say we do not want vaccination. Okay, so there is this kind of opposition and so on. So what causes this kind of counter argument and so on? This is really what I want to clear. It's reactionary in two senses. One opposes traditional thought, and the other brings back a brand new model of human development. Again, I said this is not new. It's not new because until that time, until 1500, the entire world thought that we have the center of the universe is Earth. Okay? And here is a man who looked at using the telescope and so on. And he said, this doesn't seem so. It looks more like that we are running around the sun. The heliocentric universe idea came from Galileo Galilei. What happened to him? Done to death. Okay. You will retract what you are saying because it goes against traditional thought. At that time, almost religious thought. Therefore, you will withdraw what you said in order to save your life. He didn't do that. And they killed him. I remember the last one he said. And yet it moves. Reactionary again. Same way, some of these thoughts that are common sense doesn't tell you. Common sense can actually oftentimes be essentially thought of as the same as what everybody thinks. The very word common sense really is the man in the commons thinks along these ways. Maybe right, maybe wrong. It's the same kind of a thing happened. Not only with him, fortunately, the preacher, okay, Gregor Mendel, did not go against existing thought, but Darwin did. Darwin wasn't killed because by that time, I think what they call the age of enlightenment and so on came. But even today, remember, Darwin's ideas are turning out to be a great problem. Why is that? What did Darwin say? He said, over time, random things happen in your body that change leads to generational changes of a given property. Is that okay? He didn't call it genes and so on. But he certainly said, over time, in a population of animals, plants, whatever, life forms, there will be an occasional change that happens to one or two individuals, in a manner that when that individual procreates and produces further generations, this error will keep on continuing. So you'll now have two kinds of animals. One that is the traditional one that is a mutant one. And depending on how quick you are in making children and how you adapt yourself to the existing circumstances, you may win or you may lose. In the case of microbes, germs, bacteria and so on, their reproduction time is hardly an hour or two. Therefore, your own bacteria decides to reproduce either sexually or non-sexually. In a couple of hours you will have 2. Then you will have 4. Then you will have 8. By the time you pass the day, you probably will have 1 million. Within a month, that's it. And if there is one error that actually sustains like this, or because of that error, I am going to have a slight advantage over the rest of the population, this will prevail. This is in effect what Darwin said. Okay? And he called it actually the law of natural selection. Okay? It also meant I don't need God to create me. He didn't say that right, but that's exactly what it meant. These are random. These are not programmed by some divine will and so on. Imagine how difficult a thought of this kind is going to be. Even today, many countries do not accept because they find it uncomfortable based on what the prevailing religious or faith-based views are. I'm so happy the present government hasn't thought about Darwin yet. If they do, we'll all have to fight. But it's important because lots of other things are happening. Or a given government or population group might even say, this is all known. It's been written. That kind of a thing. So ideas of this kind turn out to be rather reactionary. How many of you believe that Darwin is wrong? How many of you believe he is right? How many of you think I don't give a damn? How many of you really think that it doesn't really matter? So you take the point of view.
So it again depends.
Yes, tell me why.
It again depends upon the school of thought a person is from. If he is a conservatist, he will feel that Darwin is not right. If he is a liberal, he will feel, yeah, Darwin is right. So
I'm asking about people who don't give a damn. See, so you have to take a point of view. If you take a point of view, that means you're really bothered about what he said and you think he is right. Or this is yet one of those fringe elements that has decided and is obviously going to be wrong. Okay? There's an outstanding, very easy to read biologist. I think you all should read that, Richard Dawkins. Okay? There was a big debate during Darwin's time, immediately after Darwin's time, about is Darwin right or wrong. And the argument was not between Darwin and the clergy, but one of his followers and the clergy. So this bishop of whatever, I think Wilberforce is the name. He said, tell me, do you come from your grandmother's side or the grandfather's side who was a monkey? Did you derive your phylogeny or your ancestry from a monkey? Is that what you want me to believe? And the answer was yes. So do I, and so do you. Difficult thought. It's a difficult thought because we've been told in our religious belief that we are all sons and daughters of God. suddenly it turns out God is not needed. Much of scientists today, I won't say much, a significant number of scientists today actually don't give a damn whether God exists or not. Because for them, it is not necessary to have the concept of God and what all God does in order to explain ideas of science. That is reactionary again. And there are scientists like me. I grew up in a very traditional Tamilian Brahmin family. Those of you who are Tamilian Brahmins will know, or even Telugu Brahmins will know, how punishing the daily schedule can be.
Even in this generation. Maybe not in this generation.
How many in this generation do morning, afternoon and evening puja? You do.
Morning.
Twice a day.
Morning. Once a day.
It was essential that I get up at 4:30 in the morning, take a bath, do the morning puja, okay? And then noon time, and then evening. You call it Sandhya Vandanam, but it's not just Sandhya Vandanam, it is actually Pratana in the morning, and then during daytime and so on. Otherwise you don't get food, that kind of thing. It also had its advantages, not advantages, I mean there are what you may call collateral benefits. So the collateral benefits were that you had to learn a lot of language, Sanskrit and Tamil. And I am truly thankful that because of this punishing religious schedule that I had, we also had this opportunity to learn Sanskrit, one of the most beautiful languages, and Tamil, one of the most beautiful poetries that you read anywhere. Okay, now, all that disappeared when I went to graduate school, when I had MSc actually. Slowly that thing, whether it is a sudden freedom that you got because you went away from home to a college and so on, or whether it's actually the influence of the environment, friends, new idea that you pick up from learning new knowledge and so on. But after a while, I stopped doing that. I don't even go to temples. It is not as if that I don't want to go to temples. I don't need a temple. But when I have wife and children, I certainly will take them. So, in that sense, it's more of it's not an atheism, it's more like an agnostic point of view. Okay. But then there are scientists who do believe in this. I cannot criticize them because they have both the points of view and they will have difficulty in merging the two. Or you simply have two of them separately, as if there's one box that contains it, the other box has this one. Dr. Radhakrishnan is a wonderful example, who was the recent chairman of ISRO. He grew up like I grew up. He also learned music and everything just like all of us did. Okay. Before Chandrayaan, he went to Tirupati. Right?
Yeah.
My colleagues in science lambasted him. Okay. Other colleagues in science said, well, that is his Radhakrishnan as an individual, Radhakrishnan as a scientist. Okay. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, sir.
Yes. No.
How many of you would object that he did this, that he went to the temple? Why is that, Dr. Prakash?
In a society like ours, for that matter, any other society, there can be no clear dividing line between public and private. Those boundaries are very blurred. So you see a police vehicle charging lathi charge with a Shiva, ostensibly to protect a mosque, but there is a Shiv sticker on the jeep. So the example which I am trying to give you, that this public and private is very blurred in our context. So you cannot retain your private thoughts without getting translated into public. For instance, the example of Sanskrit which you gave, how many people which are not Brahmins, not upper caste, will have an opportunity to learn Sanskrit? So it's a very tight rope walk. You cannot keep that boundaries rigid.
I take your point, but I disagree with that. In the sense, when I asked Radhakrishnan, is that I went there as an individual. I did not go as an ISRO chairman. You would say that's not true because of the position that you hold, you also project an image that is larger than the individual. Is that the point of view you take?
No, I'm saying that this is, you are not taking into account the sociology of the society. What I mean to say that when you go to a temple, it inspires a particular kind of social network, which is always handy and useful when you need certain works to be done. And Brahmin, see, other than somebody was discussing, I think Pankaj, I don't know who was even discussing, why all scientists are Tamil Brahmins, all top scientists in India. So that's a social network also.
That is a long shot because you could say this, no, you could say the same thing about Jewish, right?
All philosophers are Jewish.
So, you're accusing me of my traditional belief system which I had one time.
No, I'm not accusing
Yes.
you as an individual. I'm accusing you as an institution. I'm not, see that I'm ready to, if we have a personal belief, I'm most happy. I have many students here, when I go back, they go to the temple, I drop them to the temple. I have nothing against the temple. But my point, I'm opposing it as an institution. I have nothing against an individual. Individual belief is supreme for me.
Sheldon Pollock is a rather well-known Harvard Sanskrit scholar. He is not a Hindu. He doesn't do Sandhya. And yet, he is one of the sharpest minds who can translate things in Sanskrit. No institution.
That's a profession for him.
Hmm?
That's a professional exercise for him. In India, when we learn Sanskrit, we can only have access, not in the recent times, but we can only have access to the language if we are born Brahmin.
That's not true.
That's true. That's true.
That was true.
It used to be true. Sheldon Pollock is not
Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for the example.
Ambedkar.
Yes.
Yes.
Because his father want to
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sir, Ambedkar father wanted.
Here is somebody,
Yeah.
everybody should
If
speak.
you are going to tell me that the institution that debarred other people from learning Sanskrit, I am against that institution. Let me make that clear. Okay? I do not belong to that institution. I partook of the benefits of the institution. That's true. It's quite like saying you are going to the IIT or IIM or TISS. Chosen people. You guys all went through some exam or something, other interview and so on. So it's already handpicked. He can object with exactly the same. The institution called TISS is so different from the institution called Osmania University or Kakatiya or something. Would that hold water?
Sir, but over here, all of us were given an equal opportunity to be a part of this institution when we entered an exam. You were born into a certain family which gave you the opportunity to become a part of an institution there. So I think that's what Asim sir is trying to say, that you were in a privileged background to be able to learn everything that you have. And so, and all your colleagues in the scientific community tend to have a similar background and all of them are privileged. So I think when you have a certain amount of privilege when you earn a privileged position, it then becomes a prerogative to make sure that you are able to break through the barriers that exist that make you only privileged.
Agreed. No disagreement on that. Okay.
Yeah.
That society by and large has been discriminatory is one that everybody has to agree. Because not denying it is foolish. You certainly have had that. So I reap some harvest because of my genetics. Right? That's really, essentially is turning out to be something of that kind. Now, but I don't, any longer don't practice that is because of a considered opinion in my own mind that I didn't do that. Okay? So in that sense, I probably broke free from that institutional bracketing. That's one way of looking at that. As to Dr. Radhakrishnan, the argument will go on. Again, but not necessarily the way that you put it, and that is, you actually were born with a silver spoon in your mouth or a silver Sanskrit book in your mouth and so on. That's different. He's a traditionalist in a variety of ways. He is